This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream. American polling is having a tough time at the moment. Infamously, they underestimated Donald Trump's support in 2016 and 2020, but they've also made a couple of other blunders more recently. Take, for example, the recent Democrat victory in New York's 19th state, where pollsters had Republicans up by 8 points going into the election. Or just the fact that a few weeks ago, pollsters were unanimously predicting a Democrat wipeout in November. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at to what extent you should trust polling ahead of the midterms, how things have changed since 2016, and some of the remaining caveats and limitations. Now, the biggest case for polls is obviously in the run-up to elections. At a basic level, polls are composed of two equally important parts: an insightful question and a representative sample population to answer the question. What makes a poll reliable is how meticulous and accurate the pollster is in constructing both the question and the sample population. The question is in many ways the easy part of the equation though. What are the most important issues facing the country, and who do you intend on voting for, are uncontroversial and effective ways of gauging political sentiment. But the real trouble comes in who should be asked such questions, and determining what makes a representative sample population. Take, for example, some recent generic ballot polls from the end of August. Now, in aggregate, these generic ballots average at plus 0.1% support for the Democrats. However, the Rasmussen Group, a center-right pollster, has the Republicans with a 5-point lead in the generic ballot, while pollsters from YouGov, Quinnipiac, and Politico all have polls showing the Democrats up between 4 and 8%. And while some pollsters are pretty much bang in the middle, like Data for Progress, there's still a massive range of results available. So what's going on here? Are the big pollsters of Politico and Quinnipiac somehow overestimating Democrat support? Are Data for Progress just better than these pollsters? Despite the fact that, according to 538, Data for Progress have a so-called mean reverted bias towards the Democrats of 3.3%, which means that they've historically overstated Democrat support by 3.3%. And what about Rasmussen? Sure, they normally lean Republican, with a mean reverted bias of 1.5 points towards them. But how do you explain a 5-point variance? Well, answering these questions is difficult, if not impossible, because polling methodology is just really complicated. But we do know some factors that explain the differences between pollsters. One of the main issues is what's known as the non-response bias, which can be traced all the way back to the 2016 election, when pollsters were shocked to find that on a systemic level, support for then-candidate Donald Trump had been massively underrepresented. Basically, certain segments of the population, specifically those who were more keen to vote for Trump, were continually unwilling to talk to pollsters for a whole variety of reasons, often simply because they distrusted the media. Now, obviously, excluding a Trump-leaning sector of the electorate meant that polls overstated support for Clinton. And while this idea has been around for a while now, pollsters made similar mistakes in the 2021 New Jersey and Virginia gubernatorial elections, where in both cases, many polls ended up overestimating Democratic support thanks to non-response bias. Non-response bias can also create a vicious feedback loop. Republicans don't trust the media, so they don't complete the polls, which means the polls overstate Democratic support, which means that Republicans trust the media even less, making them even less likely to answer the polls, and so on and so on. Anyway, pollsters have only really been considering non-response bias for a couple of years now, so different pollsters weight it differently, which does explain some of the variation between polling companies. And it's a similar story with college education levels, which turned out to be a good predictor of voting behavior in 2016. Now, pollsters didn't take into account college education, which is one of the reasons why they overestimated Clinton's support. Now, while pollsters might have gotten better at accounting for the electoral impact of college education, there's still some disagreement between them about how to incorporate this fact, which explains some of the difference between the various pollsters. The point we're making is that pollsters haven't fully figured out how to correct their mistakes from previous elections. And even if they had worked it out, there might be another previously unknown variable that's skewing the polling for this year's midterms anyway, which could give them another problem to solve before 2024. More specific to this midterms race though, the political landscape has been, complex to say the least, with the three main stories going into the election being the precedent-shattering overturning of Roe v. Wade, the continued state of the economy, and the unprecedented raid of former President Donald Trump by the FBI. Now, each of these stories offers a new motivation and different incentive to vote for a multitude of different groups. The economic situation doesn't look like good news for the ruling Democrats, with the AP reporting that a full 79% of Americans see the economy as going poorly. This coupled with the fact that the party out of power typically does well during midterms, so you'd expect the Republicans to be up by a large margin. But in recent weeks, certain economic trends have improved, with gas prices dropping 19% from their June highs. However, Republicans have two, perhaps bigger issues to contend with, those being the unpopularity of the Republican-led Supreme Court in the weeks following the overturning of Roe, and the fact that their former standard-bearer has had his home raided by the FBI, finding unsecured, classified documents in the process. Now, while we don't want to go down those rabbit holes in this video, it suffices to say that the impact of these stories has been negative for the GOP, with the overturning of Roe causing many women and young people to be put off by the Republican Party's new power to curtail abortion access in GOP-controlled states. Similarly, the raid on former President Trump has gone to underscore the distrust and personal unease that some swing voters view all Republicans with. However, it's clear that at least certain, more hardline segments of the Republican Party see the raid as further reason to go out and vote for Trump-backed candidates. And in that way, it could end up benefiting the Republicans in certain key states. Put simply, current events have been pushing voters in many disparate directions, and the ebb and flow of that change has caused modern polling to go haywire. With groups on either side of the aisle simultaneously being more and less motivated to vote, it's up to these pollsters to correctly guess who the most likely voters actually are, and how these people can be best targeted for poll responses. Undoubtedly a difficult job in rapidly fluctuating times. So, can we rely on polling? Well, yes and no. Yes, this still is the most accurate and scientific way to gauge the opinions, feelings, and sentiments of the general public. And they still grant us a valuable insight into both emerging and continuing political trends. However, recent events from the Supreme Court to Mar-a-Lago have made them a bit more imprecise in their estimations of who will be voting. And all of this further compounds polling's susceptibility to the crushing non-response bias that shocked the polling world all the way back in 2016. Ultimately, though, we'll have to wait for the midterms to come and go before we know how well the polls are holding up. But to catch every bad poll, controversial campaign gaffe, and final result, stick around on TLDR US. And if you can't wait for more TLDR to find out what's going to happen, then you can get exclusive TLDR content only on Nebula. That's the streaming service that we built with our creator friends, and where you can find a bunch of TLDR videos which will never make it to YouTube. You can also find a ton of our other videos there ad-free, and get some of our videos early before anyone else. Signing up also really helps the channel and helps us make more content, not just for Nebula subscribers, but for everyone else too. So if you want more from us and support the channel, then you can get access to Nebula for less than $15 a year with the Nebula Curiosity Stream bundle. Let me explain. We've partnered with the superb streaming service CuriosityStream, where you can find a bunch of great documentaries about all kinds of fascinating topics. Now, if you sign up to their service today using our link, then you'll get Nebula included absolutely free. That's both streaming services for less than $1 a month. A crazy good deal to get all of these documentaries on CuriosityStream and more from TLDR on Nebula. If you're interested, then the link is in the description. And thanks so much for your support.